It's the worst US air disaster in more than 20 years. A mid-air crash late last night between a passenger plane and an Army helicopter in the skies above the nation's capital. 64 people were on board the American Airlines flight and 3 were on the helicopter. Now all 67 are presumed dead. Some of the bodies have now been recovered from the Potomac River, where the plane came down, and that process continues. But while it's much too soon to speculate about the cause of the collision, President Trump has blamed diversity rules under his Democratic predecessors, saying he believes people hired at air traffic control were not always qualified. He provided no evidence. Tonight we'll bring you what is known about the collision and look at some of the questions now being raised in a tragedy air accident officials say was absolutely preventable. We begin tonight with Sarah Smith in Washington.
Rushing to the scene, hundreds of emergency services officers, not knowing if there are any lives they can save. Inflatable boats are needed to reach the wreckage. Both the plane and the helicopter have crashed in the river.
The fuselage of the American Airlines plane was inverted. It's been located in 3 different sections. It's in about waist deep water, so that recovery is going to go on today.
Overnight, the search was for any possible survivors who might have been lost in the freezing water. As morning came, it was clear everyone had lost their lives. 60 passengers and 4 crew on American Airlines 5342, 3 soldiers in the Black Hawk Army helicopter.
Despite all those efforts, we are now at a point where we are switching from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. At this point, we don't believe there are any survivors from this accident. And we have recovered 27 people from the plane and 1 from the helicopter.
CCTV pictures show the moment of impact. Very low in the sky, over Washington, D.C., the helicopter and the plane are rapidly heading toward each other, and then we can see the sudden explosion. On closer footage, we see the crash quite clearly. In the cockpit was 28-year-old American Airlines pilot Sam Lilly. His father said he started his training 6 years ago, and he was engaged to be married. Also on board, Wendy Schaefer, a wife and mother whose children are just 1 and 3 years old. A married couple of world champion figure skaters from Russia were flying with other athletes they'd been coaching in Kansas. Very close to downtown Washington and its famous skyline, the wreckage can still be seen protruding from the icy Potomac River, a distressing sight for nearby residents.
Yeah, everyone's just distraught, and so it's been shocking to everyone.
Just didn't feel right because it's, I fly with the smaller jets like that when it was coming in, and I see the helicopters all the time going through here. I see Marine One constantly going back and forth and to Andrews over there, and it just it just kind of shocking.
There are recordings from air traffic control as the accident happened.
Crash. This is Alert 3. Crash.
Fire command. The accident happened in the river. The helicopter and the plane crashed in the river.
An investigation is already underway into how this accident could have occurred on a clear night when both aircraft were following standard flight patterns. Military helicopters do fly over and around Washington all the time. This Black Hawk was on a nighttime training flight. President Trump asked for a moment's silence for what he called a tragedy of terrible proportions, before quickly blaming equal opportunity policies at air traffic control for making flying less safe.
The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan. Think of that. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel. I don't think so. I think it's just the opposite.
How you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash?
Because I have common sense, okay?
And it is just common sense, apparently. No evidence has been presented to connect diversity policies with this or any air accident. The Transport Safety Board want everyone to wait for the facts and the conclusion of their investigation.
It's not that we don't have information. We do have information. We have data. We have substantial amounts of information. We need to verify information. We need to take our time to make sure it is accurate. That's best for you. That's important for the families. It's important for legislators who are seeking answers to try to figure out what they're going to do about this.
But this tragic accident looks like it may become one more battleground in the political and culture wars in America. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Washington.
Well, as we've been hearing, it was a clear night. Visibility was good, with eyewitnesses saying everything about the approach into Washington of the American Airlines jet looked normal. So what do we know about what happened next, and what are the questions now raised? Here's Roz Atkins.
The American Airlines flight and the Black Hawk military helicopter collided over the Potomac River. The first question is whether either was off course. The plane, marked in blue, approached the airport from the south. The helicopter, marked in red, was flying along the river. The Trump administration says both were on a standard flight pattern. But right before the crash, air traffic control speaks to the helicopter, referring to it as Pat 25 and the plane as CRJ. This is the audio. In other words, the helicopter was being told to watch out. In another recording, we hear what appears to be the helicopter's pilot.
Aircraft in sight, press separation.
There's a question here about which aircraft is being referred to, because as we can see from the footage, there was another plane nearby. We don't know if the helicopter pilot had this plane in sight or the one he would collide with. Soon after, we hear air traffic control again.
I don't know if you caught earlier what happened, but there was a collision on the approach in the 3-3. We're going to be shutting down operations for the indefinite future.
In the seconds before what had happened, wouldn't there have been an automated warning? Passenger aircraft in the US use what's called a collision avoidance system. One expert, though, told the BBC the system's warnings can be inhibited when an aircraft's at low altitude. Lastly, would we expect planes and helicopters to share airspace in Washington? We definitely would. Ronald Reagan National Airport has one of the busiest runways in the US. It's just 5 miles from the White House. There's a huge amount of military and civilian flights in a relatively small area. Some aspects of the moments before this disaster were not unusual, but something went terribly wrong. Why did this helicopter and plane collide? That question still requires an answer. Roz Atkins, BBC News.
We're going to focus on some of the people on board the American Airlines jet now, with at least 15 of the passengers being athletes, coaches and family members involved with US figure skating. Laura Scott reports now on the impact of the crash on the tight-knit skating community.
Brimming with enthusiasm at a training camp for the figure skating champions of tomorrow. Among them, the teenager Spencer Lane, a regional champion full of promise and passion. Only yesterday, he said a national development camp in Wichita had been an amazing experience. But this picture was the last he posted, confirming tragically what many within the figure skating community had feared, that he had been on board Flight 5342.
Gina Hahn.
So too had fellow skater Gina Hahn. Both had been accompanied on the plane by their mothers and coaches, according to the Skating Club of Boston, which has been left reeling.
We were informed of a pretty horrific tragedy. 2 coaches, 2 teenage athletes, and the athletes' moms. This will have long-reaching impacts for our skating community.
The 2 coaches known to be on board were married couple Zhenya Shishkova and Vadim Nomov, who in 1994 won World Championship gold in pairs for Russia and competed at the Olympics. They'd been helping to develop young skaters in Boston since 2017. Tonight, 2 more clubs said they were mourning the loss of their athletes and spoke of their unimaginable grief, amid reports that a quarter of all passengers might have been involved in figure skating.
the main lesson I think learned in skating is you get back up. Keep on trying, and even when it's hard, you get back up. Even when you're crying, hurt, pain, you get back up and move forward. It's not easy, but that's what we all have to do now together.
Please join us now in a moment of silence as we think of those who have been lost and their loved ones.
Tributes paid today at the European Figure Skating Championships in Estonia, as the sport reflects on lives and talent taken too soon. Laura Scott, BBC News.
Well, in a moment, we'll return to Sarah live in Washington. But first, Nomia Iqbal is at Reagan National Airport, where the passenger jet last night was coming into land. And air accident investigators have been speaking where you are, Nomia, in the last couple of hours. What have they been saying?
Clive, it's almost back to business here at the airport. There have been so many planes flying in the skies, but if you're a passenger on that plane and you look out the window, you will still see the Black Hawk and the airliner half submerged in the icy waters of the River Potomac. The recovery operation is still very much underway behind me. Now, the National Transportation Safety Board has said that it's investigating multiple factors. It's confirmed that they have not recovered the flight data, also known as the black boxes. They plan to issue a preliminary report in around about 30 days, but they have said it will take some time because there's so much information that they have to verify. And even though President Trump seems to have prejudged the investigation, saying what he thinks caused it, the Safety Board says it's refusing to speculate.
All right, and to you, Sarah, in Washington, was Donald Trump simply speaking off the top of his head when he was talking about diversity policies perhaps being behind what happened?
Well, he didn't have any evidence for that, but what he has done is sign a memo demanding that this be investigated, that all hiring practices at the Federal Aviation Authority over the last 4 years, whilst he's been out of power, be investigated. And if there is anybody who has been hired who doesn't meet qualification requirements, then they should be sacked and replaced immediately, because he says he is convinced that it is these diversity policies that have lowered aviation standards. Now, it is being reported here that staffing levels were not normal in the air traffic control tower last night, that jobs would normally be assigned to 2 different controllers were being done by just one person who by themselves was having to handle all the planes that were landing and taking off, as well as dealing with all the helicopters that were in that airspace. Now, we don't know whether that's routine on occasions, whether that's unusual, but it's definitely something that the air accident investigators are going to have to be looking into, along with every other aspect of this crash.